Public Education. Before we get started, I would like to recognize the school board members that are with us. Of course, the Budget and Finance Chair for the school board, Will Pinkston, is with us. Also, the board chair, Miss Cheryl Mace, and she has Miss Joanne Brandon with her, Miss Amy Frog, and Miss Anna Shepard. And I don't see any other board members present, so I do want to recognize them before we got started. Dr. Register is also on the panel. He's the superintendent of our school system, and he's joined with us by Mr. Chris Henson, who is the assistant superintendent. Before you begin your presentation this evening, I would like to ask you if you all are satisfied with the mayor's proposal for your department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We there is a gap between the budget that's been approved by the Board of Education and the mayor's budget recommendation. We've had two meetings where information's been shared between the Board of Education and the administration on balancing that. At this time, we felt like it was premature to make specific recommendations prior to the council hearing.
All right, you could continue with your presentation.
Good evening, Chairman Matthews and members of the Metro Council. My name is Will Pinkston. I'm the Budget and Finance Committee Chairman for the Metro Nashville Board of Public Education. We are pleased to be here this evening to present our proposed 2013-14 operating budget for the school system and, of course, to take any questions that you might have. We worked hard this spring to put together what we believe is a responsible budget to meet the needs of America's 42nd largest school system and its 81,000 students and 6,000 teachers. I'd like to acknowledge my board colleagues who are here tonight who have been part of this process at every step. Chairman Matthews named them, but we are led, of course, by our chair, our fearless leader, Cheryl Mays. I'll turn this over to Dr. Register and Mr. Henson in a moment, but first, if I could, I always look for the headlines, the key takeaways in any situation. And the headlines for this proposed budget is we originally requested a $44 million increase for the upcoming fiscal year, about 6% over our current operating budget. At the time we made the request, we obviously understood it was a sizable amount of money. It was what we believed would help us best meet the needs of our schools and the community. And we know we're going to have to make some adjustments. I'll come back. More than a third of the original request was wrapped up in various salary and insurance adjustments, some of which are state mandated. Nearly half was wrapped up in proposed improvements, including, most notably, growth in charter schools, the addition of 5 new schools and expansions of existing schools. Within that amount also was the addition of new teaching positions to accommodate projected growth in the system. We are, as you know, one of the few urban school systems in America that are growing every year, and we think that's really attributable to the vibrant economy, the quality of life in Nashville, and to the city's leadership in the mayor's office and, of course, in the council. A smaller portion of our request was intended to offset the loss of federal funds in 2 major categories. First, federal budget cuts, including sequestration, are having an impact, which Dr. Register and Mr. Henson can explain. Also, we are planning for the continued wind down of federal stimulus funds, including those received through Race to the Top. In some cases, we were and still are proposing to permanently fund positions that have been federally funded, which we deem vital, including, for example, positions supporting our exceptional education programs. We think those types of positions are important, and we hope you concur. Also, through Race to the Top, we have identified some high yield strategies, including investments in data, STEM initiatives, and others that we believe warrant continued funding after the federal dollars run out. In the weeks since our April 12th budget hearing with the mayor, we have gone back to the drawing board, acknowledging that the resources simply might not be available in the 2013-14 fiscal year to do everything that we originally wanted. I believe the budget that you have before you technically is the version that the school board approved on April 9th before that budget hearing. We obviously are prepared to revisit it based on the feedback that we received from you tonight. Dr. Register and Mr. Henson can step you through the details, and we'll all happy to take questions. So with that, let me turn this over to our CEO and CFO to go deeper.
Thanks, Mr. Pinkston. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and have a conversation with you. I'd be remiss if I didn't first thank you for the support that you've given the public school system, but more specifically, the over 81,000 students that we serve in metropolitan Nashville public schools over the last few years. I will be brief with my general remarks. I want to turn it over to Chris Henson very quickly to get into specifics, and I know since this is such a large budget and it has so many facets that many of you have questions, and we'll move on to that pretty quickly. I think Will did a good job of talking about some of the stresses that we have. I would like to go back and be a little bit more specific about that, about some of those pressures. Our enrollment is going up. We expect an increase of 1,500 students to perhaps a little bit higher than that. That's a trend that continues every year, and our numbers have, since 2008-9, have risen from about 75,000 to a projection of well over 82,000 for the 13-14 year. That does create pressures on us, and in fact, in the Council of Great City Schools, which is the largest 100 districts in the country, there are only 3 districts in that group that have risen at a faster rate, that are growing at a faster rate than we are by percentage. That does put pressure on us. The other thing, and I doubt we'll get, we can get into detail about this if you like, but is what's happened to us in our federal budget. The jobs programs have been cut. The sequestration is a concern that we have this year, and since 2010-11, our federal budget has declined from $105 million to just over $73 million this coming year, a cut of over $10 million in federal funding this year, and that's actually resulted in a decline in federally funded positions from 1,300 positions to 800 positions, almost 1,400 positions to 800 positions in that period of time. That really puts a lot of pressure on us, and particularly when we've adopted programs, innovative approaches in our Race to the Top grant that we would like to sustain. We're having real pressure in that this year. And then finally, I guess the thing I'd like to say is that our local budget has pressure from inflation, and that's salary and benefits for our employees, and with the growth that we're experiencing, we're having real pressure on our budget in that regard. So I guess generally what I'd say is that you will not find a lot of there's very little new programming in this budget. It's more trying to hold on and maintain the programs and services that we have working at this time that we think we need to keep. With that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Dr. Register. I believe all of you have a bound copy of the operating budget that the school board approved back on April the 9th. This particular version has been on the website of the school district since early March. And if you would turn over to the first page, I did promise Council Lady Evans that I would not read this entire budget to you, and I'm not going to do that. But if you would turn to the first page, which is document number 1, this is the one that I typically try to spend the most time on, because as it reflected at the top of the page, it is a summary of the changes. And so what I'm going to attempt to do is to go through the summary of changes from the current fiscal year budget to the proposed budget, and also, as I'm doing that, mention the potential budget reductions that we have been discussing for the last month, both internally as an administrative staff as well as with our Board of Education at both the May 14th board meeting as well as the board work session this past Tuesday. The top part of the page deals with employee compensation. As I always begin my discussion, I always try to begin my discussion by saying that over 80% of our operating budget is made up of labor costs, salaries and benefits. And so when you're that labor intensive, salaries and benefits, you're going to have costs each and every year. What we're looking to propose, or at least potentially propose, would be to freeze salary steps for the current year as part of our attempt to reduce the initial approved budget down to the mayor's recommended funding level. You can see the cost for certificated employees for a salary step increase is about $4.4 million. If you look down a little further, the cost for a step increase for our support employees, which would be all of those employees in a position that doesn't require a teaching certificate, the cost for those steps is about a little over $2 million. So we're talking about a $6.5 million number for salary step increments. We have next the salary increase. The state's salary increase on the state teacher salary schedule is 1.5%. The Metro Schools teacher salary schedule is higher than the state salary schedule, so that equates to a 1.12% raise. And so as part of our budget discussions recently, again, as we attempt to reduce our budget, we are looking at the minimum 1.12% raise for both certificated employees as well as our support employees, which is a savings of about $1.8 million. Next, we have the insurance increases. The certificated insurance increase is projected at 5.5%. We have an employee insurance trust that's made up of school board members and MEA representatives that determine what the benefits program looks like and what the premiums will be. You can see the cost there of about $3.9 million. On the support insurance increase, all of our support employees, again, those employees that are in positions that do not require a teaching certificate, they are considered Metro general government employees for benefit purposes, and their benefit program is administered by the Metro Employee Benefit Board. And we have received word just after the mayor's budget hearing that the increase would be a 5% increase, and so we have reflected that savings in our recent discussions. So we've got about $6.1 million in benefit increases for both insurance and pension. I didn't mention pension a minute ago, but you can see the next line down, the support pension increase. You're probably well aware that the approved employer contribution rate for the defined benefit program will be increasing as approved by the Metro Employee Benefit Board, and has about $1 million, just under $1 million increase as an effect on Metro School District. You can see that the employee compensation subtotal is about $17.2 million in the approved version. With the potential budget reductions that we've been discussing over the last month or so, that has reduced the employee compensation subtotal to around $7.6 million. So there's about a $9.5 million savings for the reductions that I just mentioned regarding salary step increases, reducing the employee raise, as well as the reduction in the support insurance increase. In the middle part of the page, you have a few items. The first is reflective of the additional teaching positions that would be required to continue with our current pupil-teacher ratio based upon projected student growth. As Dr. Register mentioned, we are projected to grow between 1,600 and 1,700 additional students next year. Approximately 900 students of that growth would be for the expansion of charter schools, and the other 700 to 800 would be enrollment growth in our non-charter schools. We will obviously need to increase numbers of teachers in the non-charter schools to handle that growth of 700 to 800 students. We've projected an additional 21 teachers for that purpose. We're projecting 82,700 students in total for next year. The next line item is inflationary increases. This is mainly utility cost increases and fuel increases. You can see around $3.5 million. We are reflecting a slight reduction of around $300,000 as we move forward in looking at our potential budget reductions, trying to get down again to the $746 million budget figure. The next item is charter schools, about $14.8 million. 5 new charter schools will open, and additional grades will be added at many of our existing charter schools. We do have a separate document that I will be referencing as we go through the book here in a moment, document number 7, which gives a lot more detail in that particular area. So as we look at subtotal for the required additions in the middle part of the page, around $19.7 million for a total additions originally approved of $36.8 million. With all of the changes and reductions that we've been discussing, the total additions equate to around $26.4 million. So the proposal is for the school district budget to increase by a flat $26 million. The top part of the page would basically reflect all of that increase plus around $425,000 more just for employee compensation and for inflationary increases, the additional teachers for student enrollment growth, and the charter school expansion. All of those together on the top part of the page, based upon what we've just recently been discussing, equate to around $26.4 million. At the bottom part of the page, the bottom half of the page, this is reflective of new programs that were being proposed that total around $6.8 million. Several of these were initiatives that are currently funded in the federal Race to the Top grant. We know that the Race to the Top grant will be expiring after this next year, and our attempt was to transition some of these costs over into the local operating budget this coming year so that we weren't looking at having to transition everything in one year, particularly those items that we felt were very high yield strategies, initiatives that the district had undertaken with Race to the Top funding that the district wanted to continue. The new teacher project contract, this is a contract with the new teacher project for the Nashville Teaching Fellows, which recruits top-notch candidates to work as teachers in metro schools. This is partially being funded by a federal I-3 grant, Investing in Innovation grant. That grant is declining over time, and so we do have an increase there of around $500,000. The Teach for America contract, as I said, this is one of those that is reflected here in parentheses that has been funded with the Race to the Top grant. We were looking, again, to transition this over into our local operating budget. It's something that we feel is very beneficial, and we want to continue, again, as a high-yield strategy. Another of the items that is currently funded by Race to the Top grant would be the data warehouse, account 2174. We've got several positions that are in our data warehouse that we were looking to transition approximately half of those over to the operating budget this year and then the other half next year. If you look down to account 2324, the ESL, or English as a Second Language Endorsement Program partnership that the district has with both Lipscomb University as well as Belmont University. That is another program currently funded with the Race to the Top monies. Again, looking to transition that over into the operating budget. As we have had our discussions over the last month, what we've decided to do is to look at those items and attempt to continue to fund those one more year out of the federal Race to the Top grant as part of our budget reductions, knowing that again, the top part of the page with employee compensation, with additional teachers for student enrollment growth, with inflation and with charter schools is going to take up the $26 million. So anything that is added at the bottom part of the page, we're going to have to show reductions. And so we're prepared to do that. So what we're trying to do again is look at areas where we were attempting to show increases based upon things that we felt like were high yield strategies we wanted to continue. We'll probably look at funding those one more year with federal race to the top dollars. If you get down to the bottom part of the page, you'll see that the requested increase was around $43.7 million. The original request that the board approved, $764.1 million, was a little over a 6% increase. What we're looking to do as far as getting down to the $746 million budget that has been proposed by the mayor's office is to take several of these increases that are being proposed and either reduce the increase or eliminate the increase, and in several situations actually make reductions to the current budget, particularly in the area of central office positions. We're looking at making reductions of 21 currently, and that number may grow a little bit between now and June the 30th, but 21 central office positions from the proposed budget, as well as other positions and other programs throughout the budget. What I'll do at this point is to go through just pointing out the different documents that exist so you have an idea of what's included in the budget, and we can come back and talk about the summary page and also talk about the potential reductions that we've been discussing. If you turn to page 2, document number 2, I've tried to include the same format and same documents each year as you hopefully become more accustomed to them. This reflects the proposed position changes. Of course, this will change as the board approves a revised budget, a reduced budget, but it shows positions reduced and positions added. If you go to the next page, page 3, this shows the 10-month support employee work calendars, the number of paid days that our 10-month support employees are paid, and how those are broken down between student days, paid time off days for holidays and vacation pay, as well as additional pay for orientation, training, and administrative duties. If you turn to page 4, page 4 shows the detailed breakdown of an account within the detailed line item budget, which is account 2600 for our 3 alternative learning centers. We currently have 3, one at Baxter, which will be moving to the old brick church site, one at Bass, and one at McCann. The McCann site will be closing, and we will be transitioning that program to 4 middle schools spread around the county in different quadrants of the county. And so we will no longer have a standalone facility for our middle school ALC students, but they will be distributed out to 4 middle schools. If you were to look at the line item budget for account number 2600, you would see the total over in the bottom right of 41 positions and $2.7 million. Likewise, page 5, document number 5 shows the detail for account 2650, which would be all of our non-traditional schools, the middle college program, which is at Nashville State, the Big Picture program, which is at Martha Vaught, the Academy at Old Cockrell, the Academy at Hickory Hollow, and the Academy at Opry Mills, our virtual school, and our transitions program, which is housed at the Bass facility, as well as the Cone School program. Again, bottom right reflects a total of 100 positions and almost $7.6 million. You'll see that total in account number 2650 in the detailed line item budget. Account number 6 shows the additional resources pursuant to the student assignment plan as approved by the board in 2008 and implemented in 2009. As part of that agreement, we continue to show a separate schedule for the additional resources that were promised to these specific schools. We have a separate account number 2710, dedicated to the additional resources for these schools. The elementaries are at the top, the high school and the 2 middle schools schools are at the bottom, as well as the transportation costs for the zone choice option that we continue to offer to those students who would like to attend a school out of zone with transportation provided. Total of 81.5 positions, a little over $6 million. It's mainly for additional school counselors and social workers, as well as a reduced pupil-teacher ratio. I mentioned the fact that we do have additional transportation costs, and so we reflect the cost for the bus drivers as well as the fuel costs. So these are all of this represents additional resources over and above the regular staffing formula, and you can see some of the staffing formulas at the bottom left of that schedule. Page 7, I mentioned document number 7 a few minutes ago. This shows detail for the charter schools for next year. Again, at the top part of the page, we have our existing charter schools, and we show the new ones, the 5 new ones down below. The estimated number of students for next year, the estimated per pupil rate, which is based upon state law, state and local revenue per pupil, which results in the estimated allocation that would be transferred from the school district general purpose fund over to the charter schools based upon their student enrollment. Approximately, 4,400 students and a little over $40 million in total. Again, over a $14 million increase from the current year. At the bottom of the page, just for your information, we do have a charter school that's a part of the State Achievement School District at Brick Church. This revenue, state and local revenue, is taken off of the top by the State Department of Education, off of the top of the school district's BEP revenue, and so there is no flow through for this particular school. None of the funds flow to the district and then are dispersed out to this charter school. This is run by Lead Academy, and again, these funds are taken off the top of the school district's state allocation. And then if you go to document number 8, this is the detailed 29-page line item budget, which reflects all of the different accounts that we use. The State Department of Education chart of accounts requires expenditures to be budgeted and spent according to functional area, and so not necessarily by location. And so we utilize a crosswalk or conversion between our accounts and the State Department of Education accounts, both reflected by functional area. Columns C and D reflect the current year amended positions and amended budget. Columns E and F reflect position changes and budget changes, resulting in columns G and H, which would be the proposed positions and proposed budget for next year. And then column I has remarks, which hopefully provides some explanation for many of the line items throughout the budget. If you turn over to page 37, page 37 is intended to be a sort of a cheat sheet if you're looking through for something in the line item budget. If you have an idea of what the account title may be, this is sorted in alpha order. Maybe you can find, hopefully you can find the account number within the 29-page line item budget. I'll briefly just touch on page 40. I'll briefly touch on the Nutrition Services Fund. This is a self-supporting enterprise fund. On page 41, it reflects revenue at the top, the vast majority of revenue. Wrong page? I stopped at 39, okay. And then that's where I'll stop. I'll stop on 39 as well. Well, as I said, the Nutrition Services Fund is a self-supporting enterprise fund, and then I had one page which was a summary of federal programs and grants. But I know we're mainly talking about the general purpose fund. So I'll end there and again go back to page 1, which is the summary of changes, and because that's where most of the anything that would be of interest would be located, and we'll, Mr. Chairman, turn it over for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Henson. Just a point of privilege, the chair has a couple of questions, and I'll be brief because I know we have a couple of council members in queue. For clarity, you mentioned that there were several programs that were raised to the top, federally funded programs. that you all have existing funding for, but you all were still requesting funding from the Metro government for that. Why is that?
What we were attempting to do, knowing that the federal Race to the Top grant funding ends after this coming year, we were attempting to incorporate some of those, again, high-yield strategy initiatives that we feel are very important into the local operating budget so that we don't have everything hit at once in the next budget cycle. So we did have those three that I mentioned, the Teach for America contract, the data warehouse positions, and the English as a Second Language endorsement program. We did have those three in here, again, looking to just incorporate those into the general purpose budget for this coming year as a transition process.
And if those were going to be funded by the general purpose budget, what would happen to that federal money at that point? Will we just lose it, or where would that money go?
No, there were other plans on using the remainder. There's not a whole lot left of the Race to the Top grant after the first 3 years, but we had some additional plans to utilize the remainder of the funding left in the Race to the Top grant in year 4, and so we will just be foregoing some of those other kinds of things that we were hoping to do.
Okay. Another question, just another point of clarity. You mentioned the 21, I believe 21 teaching positions that were being considered, and you mentioned the student growth. And when you mentioned the student growth, you mentioned about half of that, around 900 of the students, I think, were charter school students, I believe.
Correct.
And the rest were public school students. Do the charter schools not employ their own teachers, or Metro or MNPS, can they actually employ charter school teachers? And why would that be taken into consideration for the 21 positions?
The charter schools do employ their own teachers, and the vast majority of that growth in charter schools is due to adding 5 new schools, of course, plus the additional grades at some of our existing schools. The 21 additional teaching positions would only be for the student growth that would be occurring in our non-charter schools, which is between 700 and 800 additional students. And so the 21 teachers would just be for the non-charter school student enrollment growth.
Okay, thank you. Final question that I have. You mentioned the Lead Academy at Brick Church, and that's part of the ASD. Is that not considered its own school district, technically?
It is considered its own school district, and that would be one of the schools in that district.
So why wouldn't that school district have to fund that charter school instead of MNPS?
The way that the state law is set up is that when the Achievement School District takes a school and converts it, if they convert it to a charter school or if they run it as a state-controlled school, it's the same process and same formula as the charter schools where the state and local revenue per pupil amount from the school district would be transferred to the charter school based on numbers of students. And so it's the same concept. It's just that the funds did not flow through the school district and then transferred to the school itself. Those funds are taken off the top by the State Department of Education before we receive our state revenue.
Okay, so that to me just seems like a bit of a double whammy, but I'll turn it over to Councilman Tigert at this point.
Thank you. Preface my question with my greatest concern in our general operating budget for Metro is drawing down reserve funds without the guarantee that there'll be recurring revenue to fund it in a future year budget. What is the impact on your all's reserve fund at this stage, and where do we stand on that?
We ended last fiscal year with approximately $55 million in fund balance. We project based upon revenue numbers exceeding projections mainly, we project a little over a $60 million fund balance at the end of June of this year. The proposal is to use $12 million of fund balance to fund this year's budget. Of the $26 million increase, $12 million of that is from the school district's fund balance. $10 million of that is from additional state BEP revenue and $4 million from additional local revenue. The $12 million, we feel like if $12 million is used of fund balance, it would leave around a 6.5% fund balance remaining for the school district. And I'll defer to Mr. Riebling as far as any additional reasoning or rationale why we would use that as a funding source.
Well, and Rich, if you want to comment on it, fine, but that doesn't give us, at whatever level we have to maintain, we've only got another year or two to draw on that. So you're assuming, I guess, Will, maybe that there'll be higher revenues in future years to offset drawing down the reserve fund this particular time.
Yeah, I think, Councilman, I think, conservative budget principles obviously dictate that we view any dollars from our fund balance as technically non-recurring funds, so we got to be careful about how that works. That balance, fluctuates on any, with overages or underages depending on revenue collections, but our assumption, as budget chair, I think our assumption has to be that we go into the next budget year acknowledging a $12 million deficit that we need to either address in our base budget or build into our next request or some combination of the two. So the bottom line is that the balance is about, as Mr. Henson said, about 8% of our operating budget. So we've got some room to draw it down, but we don't want to make a habit of it, and we're committed to responsible, balanced budgets. That means recurring revenue to recurring expenses in the coming years. So we're watching it closely and concur.
That's a refreshing comment, because too often we look at that and forget about that. It's not always there when you need it, type thing, and that rainy day fund's important. Final question, the same question I ask you every year about the reserve fund on the nutritional. We're not drawing down reserve funds there like we did 3 years ago.
That's correct. There is a healthy fund balance in nutrition services, and what they're planning to do is to utilize a lot of that to upgrade kitchen equipment, which would be one-time usage, as well as enhancing their point-of-sale system with hardware, software, et cetera. So they're looking mainly at one-time kinds of expenditures as they draw down some of that fund balance in the nutrition services fund.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Tiger. Councilman Stein?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't believe that Councilman Tiger didn't want to use some of that money to build more gardens and more schools. Okay. Let me preface my remarks by saying that I'm one of those people that believes that the job of those of you elected to this school board is to ask what you think we need. And we have been really fortunate to be able to partner with you all, those of us that have been here since 2007, to I think the tune of about $150 million, give or take something there, and another $300 million or so in capital money, and we finally hit a wall, because while your total responsibility is just focused on schools and asking for what's needed there, those of us here, in conjunction with the mayor, have to look at the overall budget. And we finally ran into a situation where none of us, I believe we could do everything that we want to do, and that doesn't mean that you all shouldn't be asking for it. And I'm very sincere about that. This situation creates, though, for all of us, this sort of notion that by adding $26 million, that somehow we're not adding it, that indeed we're cutting back. And I understand that so I need you to help me with a little bit, because I don't spend the time with this budget that you all do. The top line, Chris, that you went through, that's the money that has to be, that's locked in, correct?
For the most part, what we are looking at doing as far as our potential budget reductions would be what's basically required to do, which would be the state minimum raise for teachers and salary, insurance and pension increases.
Okay. Let me ask that a slightly different way, because I know you all are fine-tuning this, so I know that this is the most abstract discussion we have ever had with you all, I think, in a very long period of time. Of the $26 million increase that the mayor has put in this budget and asked us to approve for you all, how much of that approximately is locked in?
26.4 million.
Okay, so you're thinking there's $0.4 million that you all have to find somewhere else?
Correct.
You believe. In terms of, then my assumption is, and perhaps it's here and I just can't find it, that you all must have not lost, but there must be grant money or some funding source that has gone away. Do you have, if that's correct, how much is that?
That is correct, but it doesn't necessarily affect the general purpose operating budget directly. And so the reason for the fact that the $26.4 million would be the amount that would be locked in would be a combination of the minimum salary increase, the insurance increase, the pension increase, the increase in charter schools, the transfer that's required, state and local revenue per pupil, inflationary increase for utilities and fuel, and the additional teachers to maintain student-teacher ratio. Those are the only items that make up the $26.4 million that would be remaining.
Okay. Then to help us understand your thought process as you're looking at this, and I don't presuppose what this council's going to do, but I'd be surprised if this changes much, just from my own perspective. The reason you all are looking at, and then I only know what I read in the paper. I mean, I must admit, I don't watch you all as much as maybe I should, but I see us enough, so I guess I get my fill. Dr. Register, I mean, that's why you are looking at, and these are numbers, $4.09 million in central office and the 5.35 worth of new teaching. You're looking at those kinds of changes so that you can continue to do some of the other things that are below this line.
Yes, so that we can do some of those things that are below the line, and also to do those things that we feel like are required above the line.
Okay. And then with that regard, with the work that you've done with your change in central management, and I guess the current figure on the table that you mentioned that you all discussed was 21 positions in central office, and that may change. I assume that some of that goes hand in hand with the study you all had done of your central management?
Yes, we've, of course, back in February, we restructured the central office, and at that time, that really wasn't done as a budget reduction strategy. It was to improve operations, to improve practice. What we're doing now is looking at ways to reduce, in some cases, positions that we requested to add, but in others, an actual reduction in positions to help us get to the balanced budget. What we have not done is we had already anticipated the minimum number of classroom teachers that we needed to add in the district. We have not cut that. So that we feel we've really tried to protect that. What you'll not see as a result of this, unless we just have some unforeseen circumstances, is class size go up, for example. We're protecting that. We're a little bit better than the state recommends on class size, but we feel like that's very important to maintain that.
And one final question. Has the state collected, I don't know what the proper term is, fine or whatever it is that came out of the situation some months ago?
That the state withheld those funds earlier, and we treated that as a revenue shortfall, so it is calculated in the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman, if I could, I just want to say, we recognize that we are in an overall fortunate position in front of you all tonight to have had this kind of significant support from the mayor and the council over the past few years, including some pretty tough economic times. So we recognize that it's a good position to be in, to be having a conversation about how to spend 4% versus 6%. But we do have this collision of circumstances, if you will, between the loss of federal funds and growth in the system. So we're trying hard to manage it, but we realize and appreciate the support we've gotten at the council.
Well, and I just want to say, I appreciate that, because I do believe all of us, regardless of circumstance, believe we're in this with you all. And all of us would share angst over not being able to move forward quite as fast as we want to.
Thank you, Councilman Stein. Councilor Lady Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't know I was going to be that quick. Wow, I'm impressed. Well, I do have a couple questions, but I also want to say, again, with our collaborative efforts, I just want to say thank you all and to the board as well for being here. And, any questions that we ask, just piggybacking off on Councilman Stein, just basically, the constituents just want to know. I looked at, I went to a was it Hillwood or Hillsborough cluster meeting a while back, and they were talking about services. Do you remember that? Okay. And so they were saying some of those services that they didn't have, and it was the, was it middle school, elementary cluster, and it was just interesting how they talked about the different type of services that they didn't have. And I looked at page 20 in your book, and it talked about, counts number 3210 and 3250, how you got cluster-based support services, you got family community services, you got applied behavioral specialists. How can they connect to those kind of services, or will those schools be able to connect to those kind of services?
Yes, one of the areas of revision in our operations is to really try to improve services on a cluster basis that we really can't afford to provide for each individual school. This is Tony Major's area of responsibility now with community engagement and providing community services, and Tony's in class tonight. He's working on his doctorate and couldn't be here. I think it's one of his last classes, but we feel very good about how we've been able to restructure this and feel very good about the work that's going on there to maximize the benefits for those programs.
And is there a difference between the cluster-based support services and family community services? Is there a difference? On 3210, on page 20 and 30, account 3250?
They are collaborative efforts. Okay. They work hand in glove to provide for a range of services for students and families.
Okay. And my other question is that, could you just explain to me, and this is just something that I don't know, maybe I've missed it over the years, like what, on some of your accounts, you have like other expenses. I don't understand that. What does that mean? Other expenses under several of the accounts.
Right. What we use is this, try to use the State Department of Education chart of accounts, and the 4 line, which is supplies and materials, mainly is for consumable supplies and materials. Mm-hmm. The 5 line, other expense, would be things that wouldn't necessarily qualify as consumable supplies and materials. It may be small equipment. It may be conference registration. There are a number of things that don't necessarily, that wouldn't necessarily qualify as something that would be considered a supply or a material. And so we put that in the other expense account, other expense line item, if it doesn't meet one of the other categories descriptions.
Okay. And then page 13, you have like under health services, account 2314, and it says supplemental earnings, and it's a medication dispensing stipend. I was trying to understand that as well.
Correct. We do have a policy where for individual schools, for those employees that are willing to dispense medication to students, for students that cannot self-administer their medications, et cetera, we do provide an annual stipend, I think, of $400 each for those that's for employees at the school site to administer medications to students who can't administer it to themselves.
So it's not a nurse or it's just?
No, it typically is a clerical staff member at the school. All of our nursing services are provided by the Metro Public Health Department, but schools don't have a full-time nurse. They have nurses that come in and perform procedures on individual students and then go to other schools and do the same there. So we don't have full-time nurses at each of our schools.
Are they trained to do that, or they just, if they needed a Tylenol, they can just say, you have this Tylenol, and they record that they're giving this student a Tylenol, that they dispense this medication?
It's It's typically not over-the-counter. It would be something that would be prescribed to that individual student. And yes, they do receive training before they're allowed to administer it, and they do receive the stipend.
Okay. Well, I'll give someone else a chance to ask questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Council Lady Moore. Council Lady Berry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I have two questions, and the first one, I just want to make sure I'm clear. When you talked about the above baseline expenses that are locked in, you said it's the salary, insurance, pension, charter cost, inflation, and the new teachers to support the ratio, correct?
That's correct, and does not include the step increases.
Okay, and it does not include step increases?
Correct.
Okay, and then the proposed changes that you've got on page 1, with the elimination that you're potentially proposing of the 21 positions at the central office, plus the fact that you're going to be able to continue the race to the top funds for 3 of the programs that you identified, with the elimination of the 21 positions, will you be able to cover potentially all of these proposed changes down below the line? Is that?
That's what we will do.
Okay.
In the final analysis, when the board approves a budget, that's what we will present.
Okay. That's,
It's actually a total of reduction of positions of 41 positions district-wide that we're
and,
proposing to balance.
okay, so 41 positions are going to be eliminated, 21 from central office. Where are the other positions coming from?
Well, we haven't finalized all the positions yet and haven't shared all the details yet with the school board because several of these positions are currently filled and the employees have not yet been notified that their positions are going to be eliminated. So we've got a number of positions. Again, some of those are reductions from the additions that were originally requested, but then some of them are existing positions that are currently filled. So it's a variety of positions that we will, once we make that presentation to the board on June the 7th, I believe, at the Finance Committee meeting, all of that will become known then.
Okay, so that's the timeline on that.
Right.
My second question, because I have you here, is a capital question. And that actually has to do with a lot of the email traffic that we have received based on some of the MLK improvements. And let me just tell you that one of my guilty pleasures at night is to read a magazine out of the UK. And when I was reading it the other night, I was horrified to see MLK profiled in this as one of the most depressing schools in America, highlighting the infrastructure as a big problem, including the radon issue, rats, et cetera. So maybe you could just walk me through, if we've spent over $300 million in the last 6 years on capital improvements, what's the process for the allocation of those dollars, and how do we get MLK and other schools like it to where they need to be?
Well, I'll address all of those things that you asked about. The first is we did have a pest control issue at MLK. We've worked with the custodial team through GCA services. We've worked with our pest control provider, which is Cook's Pest Control, and have that situation under control. There were several reasons for the problem that have been mitigated. The pest control provider set out bait and took care of the pests. That is an issue, and was an issue, and we've continually tried to stay updated with the school administration to see if they have a recurrence, and fortunately they have not. Regarding the capital, we have a very involved process where all of our buildings are surveyed, and there are over 30 different components to the survey that it's basically a rubric that evolves into what's called a condition score for each school. And of course, the lower the condition score of the building, the higher on the priority list for renovation and/or replacement. We have a similar process relating to building utilization. If a school is over capacity, then it's obviously a candidate for either classroom additions or, in some cases, a new school to handle the overcrowding. So we have a very objective process. What we've proposed in the original capital improvement budget request, which was $159 million, would be the schools, the buildings that have the highest priority based upon their condition scores. MLK was not in the first year. It is, of course, within the 6-year capital improvement budget, but not in the first year based upon its score. It is an older building, a beautiful older building that we would love to renovate, as well as some of our other high schools that are expensive to renovate. Hume Fogg, Hillsborough, Hillwood, Overton, a number of high schools that are old facilities that need renovation, and it's just a matter of how far can you make the dollars go. And unfortunately, we do have some buildings that have a lower condition score than MLK that were at the top of the priority list.
It is working its way up the list, though, and I want to say that we really appreciate the capital expenditure last year and then again this year. So we are playing catch up. There are really two pressures on us in the district. Our average age of our buildings is 42 years old. Some of them are quite a bit older than that, and the renovation work required in some of those schools is very expensive and very extensive, if you will. The other pressure is growth in the community. So growth, a lot in the southern end of the community, but not just there, in other places. So we've got that dual pressure of expansion, building new schools, putting additions on schools, and renovations. The high schools are expensive renovations. They're our largest buildings, and in fact, a lot of them are our oldest buildings, and many times you'll see a high school renovation will run upwards of $20 million or more. So that takes up a lot of the total capital expenditure that we've had from year to year. We'd love to add to that and be able to pick up speed on it.
Maybe not tonight, but.
Right. Well, it's something we'd really
Thank
enjoy
you.
doing.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Council Lady Berry. Councilman Hunt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're right, Dr. Register. Some are. The schools are a bit older, and MLK is one of them. I went to MLK. It's 57 years old. But what I wanted to say, you requested $44 million over the $720 that you got last year. And I was glad to hear you say that it wasn't a crisis, and I was glad to see that, but it didn't allow you to go the way you wanted to go. What I was curious about is just to let us know which direction did you want to go, and also that 500 open teachers position, is that going to cause you a problem because you're going to be 20 million short from the administration if it stays the same?
Not quite sure I understand all the questions, so please come back at me if I can't respond to that. We have about, if I don't respond adequately, we have about 500 open positions a year that we feel. Our teaching staff, our total staff is almost 10,000 employees, over 5,000 classroom teachers, and so generally when we have a reduction in a few positions, that's taken up with vacancies that are not filled. We still have a very busy hiring season to replace those people that retire, those people that decide to get out of the profession or move on. And so with that amount of change every year, we're busy in the hiring process at this time.
So the 500 open teaching position you got now won't affect you that much?
Well, I don't know how many open positions we have right now, but because we're working very hard to fill those that are there, and we will continue to fill up to the teacher allotment that we have. Our principals have already received their staffing allotments. The 21 that's included here has been allocated to principals. We can't wait till the last minute, so we will staff up to this level as we go forward, and hope to have that done very soon.
Okay. Now the other question is, and this is just for information, as a result of being $20 million short, you said that it wasn't a crisis, but it didn't allow you to go in the direction that you would like to go. And what I was asking you, could you share with us what direction will you intend to go if you had the $20 million?
If you'll look at the proposed changes below the line, you can see a number of those. As Mr. Henson mentioned earlier, we really want to institutionalize some of the high-yield strategies that we have had. We're getting very good results from Teach for America teachers. That's an expensive program. That's costing us about $750,000 a year now. We want to continue that. That gives us between 80 and 100 teachers a year hired through that process. We were wanting to add to our gifted and talented teachers in the district to strengthen that program, to beef that program up, and we will not be able to do that. We're trying to increase our advanced academics. That's very important for us. We'll strain to do that with existing staff, but we'll do that with existing staff rather than growing that staff. There are a number of other instructional support positions that we would like to add that we're not expanding at this point in time.
That's quite a bit, but I'm still glad to hear you say there wasn't a crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman Hunt. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Matthews, Dr. Register, Mr. Henson, and Mr. Pinkston. Thank you all for excellent data here in terms of what you're trying to do with the money that has been allocated. The question I have is around the International Baccalaureate Program. Am I reading this correctly that account 2145 is being rolled into 2137 and that AP advanced academics will cover AP and IB programs?
That is correct. The IB program account number is being rolled into the new 2137 account number for advanced academics, which does include IB as well as, which would include an expansion at Antioch High School for the IB program, as well as advanced placement and the new Cambridge ACE program.
Well, that was my next question because I didn't see Antioch High School listed, but you did have on here that there was an application. So I was thinking that was connected with Antioch High. Is that correct?
That's correct. Okay.
The other question is around MLK. Because that is a historic building and is listed on the historic register, I believe, has there been any efforts to work with the Historic Preservation Commission or the federal funding that is set aside for historic structures like MLK, which could offset the amount of capital dollars that you would have to use in the capital budget for those renovations?
I don't believe we're aware of any federal dollars set aside for buildings such as MLK, as well as Hume Fogg, which would be an older building than MLK is.
Have you reached out to the Historic Commission or others that may have funding that is available for historic structures?
We have had discussions with the Historic Commission on work that we have done, for instance, at Hume Fogg, to be sure we were in compliance. But to my knowledge, there's not been any discussion of any federal funding available for that purpose. We would, if so, we would love to be able to tap into that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Johnson. Vice Chair Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for spending your evening with us. I have just a few questions, but I did notice in account 2400, dealing with the board members, I'm sorry, it's not 2,400. It's the board member salary line, whatever account number that is. But there's a $2,400 increase in that line. I was just wondering if you could tell me what that was for.
I cannot, but I will get that information for you. I don't know what that $2,400 increase number is, but I can get that for you. The board member's salary is set by the council, actually, and so I'm not sure why there would be an increase there, but okay. I will get you an answer.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. In account 4319, dealing with the MTA bus pass, there's a reduction of $78,000 in that account. Could you tell me a little bit about the reasoning behind that reduction?
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's based upon current usage of the MTA bus passes. We have tried to be more efficient with distribution of bus passes to students that qualify for those, so that if a student, for instance, instead of just giving a 30-day MTA pass to every student, if there can be a way where we can distribute something less than that and still meet the needs of the student, we're attempting to do that. And if we see cases where the bus passes are being abused or sold or something of that nature, then we've revoked that pass from the student. So we've tried to be much more efficient and effective in looking at how those bus passes are being utilized by the students that qualify for them.
Okay. And I think, well, this is kind of a two-part, but when you've talked about on page 1 sort of the required increases, I notice there is a $3.5 million line for inflationary increases and other required expenditures. I take it that includes contracts that you have that have built-in escalations?
It does not. Those would be reflected in the line item budget in account .9 for each account. The .9 says contracted services as the line item title. That's where those contract cost escalators would be located. What's included in the inflationary items mainly would be the inflationary factor that is applied to our utility accounts, natural gas, water and sewer, electricity, waste disposal. We use the same inflationary factor that Metro Finance uses for the rest of Metro government, and those can be fairly significant. It also includes the additional cost for fuel. We know that we do participate in the fuel hedging contract that Metro has, and we're very appreciative that that's in place. There is an increase next year in the fuel hedging contract, and the fuel hedging contract covers, I believe it's 70% or so. 70-75% of the total fuel usage, so you still have 25 to 30% out there that's subject to market changes, and so that would be probably the majority of it. We also include in this line item some of the things that come to us from Metro government that would be increases, such as radio transmission. We're part of, we utilize the Metro radio shop towers for our two-way radios. It's an internal service fee. There's a slight increase there. Building and content insurance, we're part of the Metro insurance for that, and so there was a slight increase there. So just that's the majority of the significant amount of it is related to the utilities and the increases with those and the fuel.
Okay, so if I were looking for an overall picture of your contract increases, or decreases, I suppose, other than paging through every account. In fact, could that be drawn out pretty easily?
Well, it's a combination in those particular line items. It's a combination of regular cost escalation increases plus increases for possibly additional services provided by contracts plus new contracts that would be put into place. And we can get you some detail as it relates to all of those line items if you would like, but it wouldn't necessarily be just for the contracts that have the cost escalator clauses in them.
Okay. I think that finishes me up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Harmon. Councilor Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Register, Mr. Henson, and the rest of you gang for being here. I want to loop back around to the capital question on the schools. Is it a public document to see that building rubric where you do the evaluations on that? Where do I find that?
Well, what we have is, it is a public document as far as what all of the condition scores are.
Right.
When we have the detailed discussions with the Board of Education, we present all of that information relating to condition scores as well as building utilization percentages, and then show what the recommendations from the administration would be in relation to the lowest condition scores and the buildings with the highest utilization rising to the top of the priority list. Mm-hmm. So all of the schools, I believe it's all of the schools that have a condition score of below 90 are included in that capital improvement plan that's presented to the board that breaks it out into the 6 years. And in fact, we actually have a document that's a master facilities plan that shows over 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so all of our buildings would have a score if they had a score of below 90. And that is public information.
Quick addition to that, it is a 10-year plan, and it is updated annually, so there's a review each year if conditions happen to change in buildings that updates.
And things do shift sometimes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. Councilor Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to just, I guess, start by asking some broad district-wide questions, and then I have a few things specific to the schools in my that serve my district. The tribal group was funded with Race to the Top money, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Federal money.
All right, and you are not renewing their contract?
That's correct.
Okay. What is because I'll tell you, and my constituents thought the external reviews and the work that the tribal group did was actually outstanding, and matched in their experience in the schools. And so they're looking forward to implementing and seeing some of the recommendations,
right,
coming to life. So what is your plan or your thought to replace sort of that external review of individual schools at the micro level? What are we going to do instead?
That process has been adopted in the district. We've part of the agreement with tribal was that they teach us how to perform that. How to perform that external review process, and we have people in the district that are trained to implement that process now. We went through about half of that contract and half of the term, and several of the principals with tribal here, the key leaders in that work, left tribal and moved on to other things, and we felt like it was, and with the reduction in federal funding, we felt like it was time to make a transition and to pick that up ourselves.
Okay, and could you give me the list of the individuals that will be performing the external reviews?
That's a lot of our leadership and learning staff, and I can't give it to you now, but we'll be glad to provide that for you.
Okay, that'd be great. It has been over 10 years since we did a performance audit on MNPS, something that actually should be done more like 6 or 7 years. And typically the way we handle those here, we submit a resolution to the internal auditor, and you would support that request from council, correct?
Yes, the external review process oftentimes is quite involved and and requires an expenditure of funding. So I don't have a budget for that, but would be glad to work with you and consider any external review that we have. I'll ask Chris to talk a little bit about what happens on an annual basis now.
We actually have an internal audit department here in Metro that we would rely on in their contracts to request that. That's how we would handle it.
And we've had some experiences with Metro internal audit, positive experience. They've come out on several different projects and in fact have had some very what I would consider helpful recommendations that they've made to certain areas.
Oh, great. Mr. Chairman, I think that I'd probably like to see a resolution in support of that, an internal audit, which hopefully will incorporate some of this external work that's been going on. Next question, Mr. Henson, we had a great meeting and discussion about the building maintenance. I asked Nancy Whittemore last night for an update on that project. Where do we stand with trying to combine our care and management of buildings and try and get some better cost savings there?
Right. Soon after our meeting that we had, which I also consider to be a positive meeting with both you and Councilman Anthony Davis, I did reach out to Metro General Services to let Ms. Whittemore know that we do have interest in collaborating, and if there are some areas where we can collaborate more, we are willing to do that if it makes sense. If there are some improvements that we can make where we can be more efficient, cost-effective, that's what we want. We want to be as cost-effective and efficient as we can. I did mention the discussion in passing with Mr. Riebling at a previous meeting, and so the way we left it was we're going to continue those discussions, and where it makes sense, we're going to work closer together relating to general services.
Okay. Well, I think, I'm not going to speak for Councilman Davis, but I think we both see this as a multi-year project with a goal of getting your per square foot costs as low as possible and getting that money returned to the classroom. So we're not in any hurry, but I'd like to move that ball forward here in the coming months so that we can get a plan in place to move forward. Next to last question, Race to the Top. I went to a great meeting that Mr. Pinkston held in his district a number of weeks ago, and there was a terrific presentation by Katie Kerr and Lisa Wiltshire about sort of an approach to personnel and staffing and personal development. How much money do you have in your budget for professional development to really attract and train talent?
It's a combination of funding sources.
Mm-hmm.
We, in our general purpose operating budget, we have approximately $2 million for professional development, which would include stipends that are paid for teachers to come in to receive training when they're not working, for presenters, for conference registrations, etc. We also have federal dollars that are specifically allocated for professional development opportunities, particularly in Title II funding, Title IIA funding, as well as some in Title I funding.
What's the estimate on that for the coming year?
I'll ask Dr. McCarter, who heads up our federal programs and grants department, to see if she has that with her. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, well, we can come back to it so we don't waste any time. The presentation from Ms. Wiltshire and Ms. Kerr suggested there was going to be more Race to the Top money. What's the status of that?
Council Lady Evans, I'll kind of take a crack at this, and then if any of our staff can help fill in some detail, that'd be great. MNPS, and I think really this is I'm going to brag on the school system a little bit. We finished in the top 11% of applications nationally for what was called the Race to the Top District competition, which followed on the state level competitions that happened a while back. There was not enough federal money to go around, so they didn't fund our plan, but I think everybody is committed to moving forward with that, even if it means implementing it at a slower pace than we otherwise could have done with federal dollars. It's still an aspiration, and there's a second round of Race to the Top district level funds that are being considered by the administration in Washington right now. So we don't know exactly how fast we'll be able to go, but we're still very committed to doing it.
Okay. And now dropping down to the micro level in my community, I took a look at the Tell Tennessee survey, which I wasn't familiar with actually until a constituent pointed it out to me. And the overall scores for educator satisfaction, in all but one of the schools that serve my district have dropped significantly, where the overall score in the county has gone up. Most disturbing of which is a decline of 13.7% at Julia Green, which is a well-supported school by the community. Teachers are loved, parents are adored. It's nirvana over there. Do you know what's going on there?
High expectations. The TEL survey is an important part of looking at school climate and culture, and is a constructive device to really help us, to help leaders in schools and to help faculties look at strengths and weaknesses in the school. So that's used by principals and teachers and those people who work, the lead principals who work with the principals, to really develop plans moving forward.
Okay, because the questions that I read the questions, and the questions really are about job satisfaction and support from the leadership in the school, and it's an outlier. Okay, it's different from my other schools, so it's causing me some concern, and I don't know if you're aware of this, Dr. Register, but the Julia Green PTO has withheld $90,000. They raised about $210,000. They're one of the most active PTOs in the county. They could probably actually handle the Normandy invasion if they were tasked with that. They have withheld $90,000 from the budget because there are some concerns about how the money is being applied. So, I mean, is there a leadership issue there? Because I'm hearing it, we're seeing it from the teachers, we're seeing it from the PTO. That's, well, and I don't know the answer. I'm asking.
Right. Well, I think the principal there is doing a good job. I think there's a conversation going. I had heard a little bit about the PTA budget, so that's a conversation, a collaboration to have to determine how those funds are used going forward. I'm very proud of the fact that the PTA at Julia Green has access to that kind of revenue.
Well, they work pretty hard, I can assure you.
Yeah.
What they would, I think, like to do, they've been funding a math specialist for a number of years, but not actually seeing results from that specialist. In other words, they're not seeing the gap close, they're not seeing the scores incline, and are kind of interested actually in having maybe an external review to see if they're spending their money wisely. Would you support that ambition? That seems like a real sensible thing for parents to do.
I would not recommend that PTAs use funds that they raise to sponsor or to fund evaluations. I really think that's our job to do that, not the job of PTAs.
Well, they want to know how they should spend their money.
Chris?
Well, typically what we tell principals is your school improvement plan, which is the school strategic plan, which sets out the goals and objectives of each school, should drive everything you do, including how you budget and spend your money. So my recommendation would be to start there. As far as regarding how the money might be applied, the PTO is a separate entity, a separate organization, and the PTO officers can determine how they want to spend that money and spend it. It's not necessarily something that, of course, you always want collaboration between the parent-teacher organization, which is a school support group, and the school administration, but it shouldn't be something where the PTO feels like the money is not spent according to what it was, the reason that it was raised.
And I think that's how they feel, because otherwise they wouldn't have withheld $90,000. They weren't getting adequate answers to how the money was paid. So moving on, one of the things that I had hoped to see a little bit more of out of this budget as a result of the restructuring and as a result of the recommendations that the tribal group is more school level budgeting, how actual dollars following kids. When can I expect to see that?
We've begun that process this year. We have 17 schools that are included in a pilot program. Of course, 17 schools is larger than most school districts in this state. And what we're doing is those schools are basically given a lump sum amount, which is the average salaries and benefits, average position costs for the positions that they would typically receive under the current staffing formula, plus other dollars that they would receive. And they are working with their school leadership team based upon their school improvement plan to determine how they want to spend that money. Of course, you have state law as it relates to pupil-teacher ratio that must be met, and that takes up the vast majority of it. But those principals do have autonomy over how to utilize the dollars that would be allocated to them anyway. And we're planning to increase that pilot next year and the next until hopefully, ultimately, we get to the point where that flexibility and autonomy is given to every principal. And then as we move along, we would move from what's called a school-based budget to what's called a student-based budget, which would be a dollar amount per student that would be allocated to each school with different weights on different types of students depending upon their additional needs.
And what is the rollout time period to where we get to the point where we're basically the dollars are following the kids?
Well, we're doing the 17 schools this year, and we're going to see how that works, and then determine based upon principal readiness and training that's provided. We'll determine how many more we will go next year. We'll determine that in the spring. I don't have a time frame as far as when all 140 plus schools would be under that kind of scenario. There are some principals who that's not their favorite thing. Finance is not their favorite thing, and so it's going to require some training. We want to do it right where we don't run into problems down the road, but it'll be an incremental process.
Okay. Could you send me, I'd like to see at least just one of the 17 schools budget, kind of, what for the pilot, how you're approaching it, if you could send me that. And then I guess I got one more point to make, and then I'm going to move on to my soapbox, which is the brain drain. We've lost MLK principal to a charter school. We have been losing great teachers to the private system and to the surrounding counties for years, and we have to address that. You're going to have to solve that problem. And the last thing I will say is that Mr. Pinkston, I think, did a world of good by having a meeting in his district to talk about the tension that has emerged around schools in this county recently. I actually, and Charlie Tiger, you might want to catch somebody in the mayor's office. I actually very strongly support the mayor's position on this budget. I think he's doing the right thing. I think that innovation is the mother, I'm getting tired too. Scarcity is the mother of innovation. That's how you change. That's how you get better, when you have scarce resources. And that's the only thing that's going to change things. I hope that in the coming year, I see less tension, I see less public fighting, which is what we've been seeing, because that's not good for anybody. and it's most definitely not good for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Evans. Councilman Anthony Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you guys for being here so late with us and to the board. Really appreciate you guys' time and sitting with us this late. I'll keep mine brief just to let the last few probably that want to go. I also want to real quick thanks for the efforts at the Stratford cluster. I think we're making some real progress there. We had a great panel the other night. The chair was with us. A great panel, documentary. It was really neat. Alan Coverstone came out. I just really appreciate you guys putting the effort into our cluster over there. Back to what the very early points with Councilman Stein, I think we've got a good number. Maybe we're coming to terms with the 26 million. Do you guys, just bottom line, feel like if that was the number that you're going to be adequate with the additional 26 million in this year's budget?
Was the question adequacy? I'm sorry?
Yes. Bottom line is that number going to, would that be the number that would work for your budget?
We will make that number work. I wish we could do more in terms of strategic compensation planning and building teacher salaries. That's our big inflator, though. And so I don't want to come across as being negative about this, but there are shortcomings in what we would like to do. But we will make that number work.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I understand that. I understand the difficulties and what you guys are trying to do. I think just some of the concern we had was with, it was a big number last year, the tax increase, and then a larger number this year. It's impossible to jump ahead to next year, but, do you anticipate with charters, all these things, further larger increases every year, or do you think we're sort of tapering to an area where we may be getting more minimal increases in the coming years?
Well, I believe we had, was it 6 charter applications that were submitted this year? Don't know yet how many ultimately would be approved. We do know that many of our existing charters, their growth plan is to add an additional grade each year, and so we know we'll continue with that. Every year, regardless, we're going to have additional costs, just like the general government does, with benefit increases as well as any salary increases, but insurance and pension, as well as salary increases, plus the normal inflation with utilities and fuel and other kinds of things. So we'll continue to have need for increases that would be required, and if the revenue doesn't meet the increased expenditures, we'll have to look at making reductions in other places.
Sure. And that kind of ties into my next one. I asked this last year just about charters in general, and this is more philosophical than anything. I'm just kind of more putting it into the ether, I guess, anything. But I'm not against charter schools or anything. I'm just kind of wondering when our point of our wall is, or a point of no return, where there's just too much money. We've got too many fixed costs with our regular schools. Because as you pull kids away, we still have to pay for our neighborhood schools and that sort of thing. You got to have the teachers, you got to have the staff. So just any comments on that this year as we continue to grow those schools?
Yeah, I think we recognize the pressure of growth, and we're very unique in the country. I've had a lot of questions about, well, can't you cut back the infrastructure as more kids move to, can't you reduce what you do in the district as the charters increase? Well, the thing that makes us unique is that both numbers are going up. Our charter school enrollment's going up. The public school enrollment's going up in addition to that at the same time. So we're not in a declining situation on either side of that equation. So I think that pressure on the budget will continue as we go forward. The question is, so what's enough schools? How many is enough? And I think that's something that's a real question as we go forward. We have 153 schools now, so Typically, charter schools are a little bit smaller than the public schools. Are we right-sized? Do we have to look at the public schools that we have in different parts of the county and look at overcrowding in some areas and underutilization in others, and we have to really consider whether we can consolidate or close schools as we go forward? That's tough on communities, and balancing that and working collaboratively with charter school providers is really, I think, an important direction for us to take as we go forward.
Councilman, if I could, if we're talking about philosophical ideas, I think, the scenario that Dr. Register outlined of a fast-growing urban system, we're going to add 15% to our student population over the next decade. That is a significant set of challenges for all of us in this room and across the community, but I think there's also some opportunities to begin thinking about how charters and traditional schools interact in ways that aren't so hostile. At what point do we start considering high-quality charters? That key term there is high quality, as tools for managing growth in the system. There are literally, parts, as you guys know, of the county where we can't build schools fast enough, and I think there are opportunities to kind of separate some of the tension and start putting everybody kind of to work, in the same, get everybody rowing in the same direction. So I think there's opportunities. I do. And I think the rest of the board, we have that conversation a lot.
Great. And yeah, scalability is definitely one thing I think about a lot. I really want to see, what we're learning out of these schools. Maybe rather than continue to add, we scale what we're learning. What's working great at these schools that, have them popping up everywhere, and let's maybe scale some things. I know that's difficult to do district-wide because, they're small and they're a little more nimble, but you're doing the principal autonomy thing. You are doing some things, I think, have evolved from that, and just, your own ideas as well. So I think that's great. Another thing from last year with the teachers and the raises, that sort of thing, I had heard some grumblings about maybe teachers that were making a little bit more have kind of been, or older teachers, have kind of been pinched in the salary range. Is there any comments on how the teachers are doing?
Yeah, if you go back to what our strategy was last year, it was to raise beginning teacher salary, and I may be off a percent or two on my number, slightly on the numbers. Some of our human capital staff back there can correct me if I'm wrong, but our beginning salary for new teachers last year put us at a ranking of 36th in the state. At the upper ends of our salary schedules, we fared much better. For teachers with many years of experience and master's degrees and so forth, we fell in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th ranking in the state. And we still are pretty much in that area now. Our strategy was simply to raise the bottom, and the way that we could afford to do that was to take the bottom off the salary schedule. A second step in that process is one that we really can't do this year, but the second part of that is to look at compressing the salary schedule so that you get to the top faster. With limited funds this year to apply to teacher salaries, what seems fair to us is to do an across the board. It's a minimal increase, but everybody does get the same thing, including non-instructional staff. It's a 1.12%, and that seemed the fairest thing to do with a fairly limited amount of money. I have talked to our human capital staff about this year, and very soon beginning strategic compensation study, and actually our staff's already started working on that. We need to relook at it. We need to look at what's effective, what can work, how do we take the existing money that we have and repurpose it or redirect it to get a bigger bang for our buck. I will say this, last year the salary increase, the beginning salary increase was a rumor, and we saw an increase in the quality of teachers who were applying to come to work for us last year. We're really seeing the benefit as we go out and recruit teachers with that higher beginning salary. And a very high percentage of our teachers are new teachers. The first 5 years on our salary schedule is the same. It's $40,000 a year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'll continue to see that benefit with the new teachers especially, and, as we have with our general government employees, just morale and that sort of thing. So I think that's about all I had. I want to ask one neighborhood thing since you're here. Rosebank, are we close to knowing about being a magnet? I know we had applied for a grant.
Yes, we have, and we have not heard from that grant yet, but we still feel very good about it.
Awesome.
Those grants have not been awarded by the federal government as of this date.
Okay. East Nashville's very excited and definitely wanted to ask about that and appreciate all the work you guys are doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Davis. Councilman Claiborne.
Thank you. I appreciate Councilman Stein kind of framing our situation here early on, and Council Lady Evans kind of buffered that a little bit. We're in a situation here where right now the school budget is approaching the 50% mark of the metro budget. So as a council, we not only have to fund the school system, but we have to fund all the other departments and operations in metro government. And you guys kind of have somewhat of a safety net in that the state law says we can't ever fund you any less than you were funded the year before. So the trajectory, when you consider the inflationary cost and the fixed cost that you've talked about earlier, in the not too distant future, we're going to break that 50% ceiling and go into territory that we've never been in before. So these discussions are going to get increasingly difficult. And the onus is going to be on the board and the administration to help us in putting the brakes on. Otherwise, we're going to reach a point where the weight's going to topple and the rest of the government's going to suffer. We have to educate our youth. We have an obligation to do that. But there has to be a balance. And so when we come to these discussions, I hope you understand that we're trying to do our job on this side to question and provide answers to our constituency that they don't understand, and it's hard for them to comprehend. A couple of questions about the budget document that I have. On page 6, under the table that's there is a $1.6 million item there for additional professional development days for 81 employees that the other 4,900 plus employees don't have the benefit of. How do we justify that?
What you're referring to, Councilman Claiborne, is document number 6, which would be the additional resources pursuant to the student assignment plan, which was approved in 2008. As part of the student assignment plan that was recommended by the Student Assignment Task Force and approved by the Board of Education, there was a provision for either a 5% increase in pay for all school employees or 10 additional professional development days for those employees, which would equate to one and the same since the number of work days are approximately 200. So 10 additional professional development days would be 5% more. That was for these particular schools that were considered to be more in need, particularly as it related to the students that would be going to these schools after the student assignment plan rezoning went into effect. And so this is just complying with what was approved both by the task force and the Board of Education when that student assignment plan was approved.
So these dollars are locked in then, according to an agreement. These are not up for discussion.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. On the budget, on the jobs that have been cut, the 21 or the 41, whichever it happens to be, how many of those jobs are over $100,000 salary jobs?
don't think we have that information with us since these positions haven't been formally approved as far as reductions go yet. We will be presenting that information to the Board of Education on June 7th at their Finance Committee meeting regarding which positions are being reduced. Right now, it's still in discussion stage.
How many are you considering that are over $100,000?
I don't have that information.
How many are under $50,000?
I don't have the information relating to all of those positions that are being considered.
So when could we get that information? After the 9th?
The Board of Education will get it on June 7th, and they'll get it first. And then once they get it, then it'll be public knowledge.
Could you send the copy of that to the council office so that we could see that?
Sure.
Okay, I have just one other question related to this. Last year when we were here, there was a lot of attention given to a travel agent that was in the budget. Is that person still on hire?
The title travel agent was an incorrect title that was given by a councilman. This is a clerical position in the purchasing department that handles all of the travel requisitions from all teachers, school staff, administrative staff, departmental staff for conference registrations and travel. And yes, we still have a clerical position in the purchasing department that deals with all of the travel requisitions for all the employees in the school district.
Okay. I have several questions related to the charters. Just for clarity here, each charter gets $9,100 in funding from state and local monies to operate. Is that correct?
Yeah, the state law requires total state and local revenue per pupil to be transferred to the charter schools. Right now, we're estimating that amount at $9,100. Of course, that's a moving target because we're having to estimate student numbers, student enrollment numbers for next year. Plus, we're estimating state and local revenue since we won't know what our final state BEP revenue number is until July, but currently the estimate is $9,100.
Okay, so do charters get any other dollars from Metro other than the $9,100?
They do not. They receive the full $9,100 per pupil.
Okay. Now, help me understand. I'm quoting here from a March article in the newspaper, and it says that the other charter school costs also are shouldered by local school systems. For example, the school system pays all administrative costs associated with pension funds and insurance payments for charter school teachers, but does not charge any charter school for these services. Is that an accurate statement or not?
I think what the intent of the statement was that all of the payments for insurance and pensions flows through the school district's employee benefits office and is then distributed out to the state retirement system or the Metro retirement system or the insurance carriers. And so it's not as if the school district is actually paying the costs for the benefits for the charter schools, but there is effort being provided by the Employee Benefits Office on behalf of charter schools to administer those kinds of responsibilities. So they're more indirect costs as opposed to direct costs.
So when the traditional Metro school gets funding from the state, we get $9,100 for each one of our students. Is that correct?
No, the $9,100 is the total of state and local revenue per pupil, so that includes state BEP revenue as well as property tax revenue, local option sales tax revenue,
okay, but what we get in the traditional school amounts to this, basically the same amount that the charter gets. Is that correct?
Well, what the school district receives is the same amount that goes to each charter school.
Right, okay. So out of what we get from the state then, does the pension and administrative costs come out of that?
Well, it's a part of the school district's budget. It doesn't come out of any fund that goes to a school and the school pays for that.
But I mean, the pot of money that we get from the state and the pot of money that we get from Metro property taxes that go to the schools, all of that goes to fund the total operation of the school system, right?
That's
Whether
correct.
it's providing the
pupil expenditures or teacher retirement benefits, insurance, or whatever. So I guess the question I'm trying to get at, Metro gets money from the state and from us, but we don't get anything else. So I'm trying to understand why the charter would get the $9,100 that's coming from the state and from local, and then get additional dollars that we're not getting in the traditional school system.
They don't get any additional dollars other than what's estimated to be $9,100. They don't receive any additional dollars. They do receive the benefit of the school district processing some of their payments, insurance and pension payments, and other types of things.
But is that getting the benefit of the school system doing that? Is that in addition to the $9,100?
It is, but it's not a direct cost. It's the same kind of...
Well, does that impact your budget, your bottom line on your budget? Is that money that you don't have that you would have otherwise?
It's not money that we don't have that we would have otherwise. It possibly could have a future impact on our budget if we have to increase staffing in some of these departments that process some of these payments for charter schools, but it's not something that currently is increasing our budget.
So the article in the paper is misleading, and it's the way it's stated. Are you saying that?
I'm saying that the way that it was stated should have been more related to indirect costs rather than direct costs.
But whether it's direct or indirect, it's still cost, right?
It's costs, yes, it is still costs, but it's not something that, in my opinion, that is currently increasing the school district budget, but has the potential to do so in the future.
Dr. Register, were you going to?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. There's the increase in size of the charter schools, the number of students, the number of schools will cause some costs to go up, and we're looking at a fee-for-service approach to actually charging charters for services that to amount to an expenditure of funds. For example, we've got a couple of data people who work with the charters to provide data to them, and it's grown to the place now where we need to try to determine a cost recovery for those services provided. We're in the process of working that up across the board in a number of areas. It just hasn't been a significant expenditure up until this time, but as the number goes up and as the number of schools go up, that cost will increase.
Okay, so are charter school teachers considered part of the local school teacher force?
There are, well, yes, as charter schools are a part of the school system also, so the teachers are too, but there are different regulations that apply to those charter school teachers than apply to our other teachers.
If a charter school closed for some reason, would that staff get absorbed into the school system?
I need to ask HR to address specifics on this about the status of teachers as charters are closed and what teacher rights are as they come back. Katie or Susan or Craig?
Good evening, Susan Thompson. If they have been an MNPS employee and they go to work for a charter school, they have a 1 year's absence that they leave at MNPS to go work in a charter. At the end of that year, once they've been with the charter, if they want to come back to MNPS, then we find a position for them.
So does that 1 year count toward their retirement?
That's a good question. Does that? Katie's the one that knows the answer. It does.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
I have some other questions, but I'll be glad to go to the back of the queue if you'd like me to.
Well, no, I thought you were finished. Go right ahead. You said thank you. I just thought that was...
I have a couple of questions about the core curriculum. Could you tell us basically how you would characterize where we are in the implementation of the core curriculum?
The Common Core, it's a phase-in. We're beginning that process. We've still got a couple of years to go in fully making a conversion. It requires a change in teaching practice and a different set of standards, a different set of expectations. So it is a process that takes several years, and we're in the middle of that process.
Okay, so is the school system obligated to implement the Common Core
Yes.
because we took Race to the Top dollars?
Not because we took Race to the Top dollars. The state of Tennessee is a Common Core state, and it is our requirement to convert to Common Core.
So no system then across the state has everybody is in the same boat here as we go forward. Okay, have you guys made any projection as to the cost to update the technology that'll be needed to fully implement the Common Core assessment standards?
We have a very detailed technology budget, and I don't know if we have Common Core or Park assessment, which is the name of the assessment, completely isolated in that, but it takes an infrastructure build in all of our schools and a lot of user equipment in our schools. And John Williams is back there. John, can you speak specifically to the cost for implementing Park assessment, that portion of the technology budget?
Good evening. What we're doing for the implementation is we have a robust plan to upgrade all the wireless in our schools to high-density wireless. It's going to cost us approximately $7.5 million. We have additional LAN upgrades we need to do within some schools that are projected to cost us about $5.5 million. That will address the network requirements. Next, we have to address the devices that will be required for students to use, because the Common Core assumes the availability of devices for students to use daily. And right now we have a shortfall in the number of devices that will meet the Common Core requirements as the state has put them out. So we are looking at, if I had to give a number today, between $15 and $20 million that will be needed to get the number of current devices in the hands of all the students for Common Core.
I think, John, thank you for sharing that, and I think that's right. However, I want to say that the use of technology and instruction is very important, and that's just one piece of it. We're really trying to use technology to a much higher degree in our district, because we feel like that's one way to eliminate achievement gaps and to improve the quality of instruction in our system. But the assessment requirement is very real, and it's right upon us right now.
So, I mean, we're looking here based on what he said. When we sit here next year, we're looking probably at somewhere in the $12 to $15 million range of an increase in technology costs in your budget now, right?
We're already addressing that in part in the budget request that we have before you this year.
How much is in this year's budget?
In the budget this year for technology is $10 million capital. In addition to that, we have an operating budget that has the IT component built into it.
Okay. Has the state made any kind of projection statewide what kind of shortfall there's going to be because of this?
I have not seen a total statewide projection. There has been some funding increase from the state, but it's not a significant amount in terms of the total required.
I was reading in an article not too long ago The group Accountability Works estimated that our neighbor to the south, the state of Georgia, was going to experience a $185 million implementation gap over the 7 years that it would take them to fully get into this.
I'm not surprised at that. I would expect ours to be somewhat like that.
And so, as one of the larger systems in the state, we're going to share a significant portion of that gap then, right?
That's correct.
Not good news.
I will say this, I think the assessment piece and the technology required is one matter. I think the move to Common Core is a big move for us, but I do think it's a good curriculum.
What is the expected proficiency level after the first year or so of Common Core implementation?
I cannot tell you that. Will there be an implementation gap? The answer, a gap or a drop, I think the answer is yes.
So
it's a big change.
You're familiar with
I might be wrong with that.
You're familiar with some of the others. Kentucky reported 30% in their first year when they implemented this. The chancellor of the
However, let me say this about that, though. That doesn't mean that the children in Kentucky know 30% less. What that means is that they're being held to a different standard and different expectations.
Right, but their scores still dropped. The Board of Regents in New York, they said they advised all their schools to expect a significant drop in their scores when they implemented Common Core.
Councilman, if I could,
yes.
I spent a little bit of time over the years working at the state and worked on, was part of basically what has become the standards reform movement in Tennessee. And this has really been a two-step process. Our standards, we began raising our standards in the state before Common Core. As a matter of fact, the work that we did in Tennessee in 2007, going into 2008, to envision a new set of higher standards actually laid the groundwork for what became Common Core in other states. So one way to look at it is Tennessee and Nashville and others really drove a much bigger conversation that ended up involving more than 40 different states. When we implemented those new and higher standards in the first year of implementation in 2009 and 2010 school year, that was when this very steep proficiency fall off happened. So Governor Bredesen famously used the statistic in 2007. We were telling 83% of 8th graders in Tennessee that they were proficient or advanced in math. Well, it turns out the number was more like 25 or 30% because we had set the bar too low. And when you compared that number to national assessment of educational progress, it was just a much lower number. So we made that first adjustment, and there was a steep drop. As we shifted again, and we're still in the process of shifting, the expectation is that you're not going to have that steep of a fall off. There might be some fluctuation, but there will hopefully not be the kind of drop off that we experienced in that first school year, but we got through it.
Okay, so from what I've read, like when Massachusetts adopted this, they actually lowered their standard by adopting Common Core. Would you say that we're doing that or not? It's the way to think of, I don't know, I don't think we lowered our standards, nor do I think we raised the standards, but we have in this state simplified the number of standards. So another statistic, previously for third grade math, there were 113 different standards that a teacher had to teach to. In the Common Core era, there's now something like 26, but of those standards, they're more focused. They go deeper rather than just sort of hit a superficial level, which is what was characterized before. So I think it's getting to roughly the same place with a lot fewer standards, more simplified in terms of the number, but also more sophisticated in the level of teaching that's happening. Is that a fair way to describe this? Well, it's just, I mean, obviously, we don't really have a choice in this since the state's adopted it, and so it's a program that's being pushed from the federal level, I suppose, to the states, and there's been very little field testing on this, right?
I think there's, you mentioned Kentucky early. They were an early adopter, and their experience is probably a bellwether for other states.
They were in 2010, right?
I believe so.
Right.
So.
So nobody really knows at this point in time how this instructional model is going to affect teachers or students or schools going forward, do we?
I think, if you talk to teachers, I think a lot of them will say it's a good shift, and others will say they don't feel like they're prepared enough, which gets to an issue you raised earlier about professional development. So I think it's something we're going to have to watch.
Right. Dr. Register, were you going to?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. So, I just thought about, and I'll finish with this, Mr. Chair. If the Federal Drug Administration were to approve the use of a drug without any trials, without any concern for possible harm or unintended consequences, we would all find that to be most objectionable. Do you agree? I think we're in a situation here with having to adopt this particular line of instruction here with no field testing under much the same circumstances. We don't have a clue what's going to happen other than we know that it's going to increase our cost tremendously. And we don't have a guarantee at all in 5 or 6 years whether our students are going to be better off or whether they're going to be worse off, nor whether the students that are behind now are going to be further behind or just get tired and quit. I admire what y'all do, what you have to do, and I don't envy the challenges that you have. But I just admonish you that going forward, when you bring a budget to this body, you have to be as prudent as possible in what you're bringing. And what you said earlier about you're not going to be able to do the things that you would like to do, the things you want to do. When the people who pay the taxes that fund the school system lose their job or they don't get raises or whatever, then at some point in time, when there's too much money at the end of the money, they have to start cutting back. They have to start letting go of services or activities that they have been accustomed to and that they like to do in order to live within their budget. And I think that when we look at what I've just said about the trajectory of us going forward here in the next few years, that there's going to have to be some serious look at living within the means, because we're not going to be able to fund the whole government at the same rate we are now with the kind of increases that schools pulling for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Claiborne. Mr. Henson, Councilman Claiborne asked for some information. You said it will be available June 7th. Is that the correct date? That's a Friday.
June 11th.
June 11th, I'm sorry. The June 11th is the board's Budget and Finance Committee meeting, which would precede the board's regular board meeting. So June 11th, my apologies.
All right, just wanted that clarification. Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to kind of get back in on the budget piece. I've heard, and I read between the lines, it's kind of my nature, that when we hear that this is the money, we've kind of hit the wall, then and we're taking $12 million out of reserve, which that concerns me, to be candid. I mean, that's nothing that should be surprising to anyone that I'm saying this. But given that, Mr. Henson, are we in the current year where you have the major increases with the insurance and the pensions, or is that coming next year?
I think you're referencing the state pension,
yes.
the defined benefit plan through the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. The employer contribution rate is on a 2-year cycle. This is the second year. This coming year will be the second year of that 2-year cycle, so there is no change as reflected here on the summary sheet. And so there's the potential for, obviously, for change in the next year when it goes when it's reevaluated based upon the actuarial studies. And that employer contribution rate, which currently stands at 8.88%, could very well increase or change. Just don't have any idea what that might look like at this point.
Okay. But given the history of what's occurred over the last decade, now I'm going to direct this to Chair Pinkston. Would it be prudent on the board's part to go ahead and begin looking, realizing you're starting with a $12 million hole right now, understanding what your estimated cost is going to be, understanding what the estimated number of students may be for charter schools, and understanding what the estimated number of new students in the regular traditional schools are going to be? Would it not be a prudent thing to maybe consider looking at evaluating the budget starting at July 1? And I can't put you on the spot as far as the board, but is that something this board would consider doing and starting to look at? Because I think we as a whole are going to have to start doing that as a government, simply because Councilman Claiborne, I mean, we basically, we've got more month than we've got money. And so I don't know if that's something the school board has talked about or considered, but just would like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilman, I used the term earlier, collision of costs. This year, it's the federal, sequestration and dwindling of race at the top, plus, growth in the system. Well, next year, it's still going to be growth in the system, but it's going to be something else. And there are, of course, short-term costs to charter schools in particular. Just because you take 20 or 30 kids out of a building and the money follows the children doesn't, as you know, mean you can't turn off a bus or change staffing patterns or change utilities. So we've got to think differently about how we approach this, and I think it means thinking earlier. We had a work session this week where there was a good deal of discussion about as soon as we finish this cycle, soon, hopefully, beginning to kick off some earnest conversations this summer about what the next operating year looks like. So yes, I think the board, there's uniform support among the board to look at opportunities where they present to do things differently, if it makes sense, and to think farther out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Glover. Councilman Stanley.
Thank you. I appreciate the Board of Education. I'd just like to take this opportunity to say I'm very thankful to the Board of Education and to specifically the Board of Education. I want to salute you for taking the action against allowing a charter school. Earlier on, I was very appreciative of that. I think it's important that we understand the difference between charter schools and neighborhood schools. I was on the council in 1998 when we got released from the federal desegregation order. And I know that we adopted the Commitment to Excellence desegregation plan. And with that, we got the federal government's approval of that desegregation plan and were released from the federal busing mandate. We gave all the authority back to the local officials to administer the Board of Education. But now these charter schools have come in here. I've read a number of reports over the last 8-9 months. I've read a number of reports from different education departments from massive universities up in New York and California. And they have all been critical of charter schools because they have stated that charter schools really locate in highly fluid communities that have a lot of money. And Metro Nashville does have a lot of money. We're growing at leaps and bounds. I will say that one of the things that you stated earlier was that you have about 81,000 students in the Metro Nashville public school system. But I know in May of 1971, there were 90,000 students in Metro Nashville. But we were released, when we got released from that federal desegregation order, we had the opportunity to rebuild enthusiasm among the public for the school system serving Metro Nashville and Davidson County. Now, one of the things about charter schools was they were established, that concept was just established in 1988, 25 years ago, by Albert Shanker. And he was with the American Federation of Teachers. He was their president from 1974 to 1997. But in 1993, he removed his support from charter schools because that concept did not go the way he was expecting. He was expecting that charter schools to collaborate with public school systems. Instead, they have been purchased by big business, and big business has wanted to make money off this system and this city by operating these charter schools. And so they are more competitive than they are collaborative. And what's more, I think they have been very, very dependent upon the high-risk, high-stakes testing that was really, we saw an example of that in the No Child Left Behind federal legislation that was sponsored by President Bush. That was a piece of garbage. That thing was just a piece of garbage, trash. It's been repealed up on the federal level. I'd like to see Metro Nashville be the first city to stand up and tell the state and tell these charter companies that you are the ones that have the authority to make the decisions for the students in this city. I think it's vitally important. Now, I know on page 7 of your the book that you gave the council, I was very appreciative of all this information that you gave to all of the council members. This page 7 deals with charter schools. There are already 13 in existence. They operate at over $35 million annually. And that's public money. Now, charter school enrollment is very selective. They have gone against, they will not allow students to attend charter schools that have physical or mental disabilities, have behavioral problems, and they throw all those back to the general schools in the public school system. So you cannot compare charter schools to general schools. That's ridiculous to try and compare those. And many charter schools, what they'll try to do is they'll just try to expel students before the test taking date, so they can just go on ahead and get the highest score, test score that they possibly can. I'm very much against having an additional 5 charter schools in Metro Nashville. We were the 3rd city in the nation to be released from the federal desegregation order in 1998, behind Denver and Oklahoma City. Then came Nashville. I want us to stand up and show this nation that the Board of Education, the mayor, and the Metro Council are prepared to administer the school system itself. These charter schools are not administered by the school system. They're administered by individuals that are employed by the corporations that operate these charter schools. This is just a private school saying that we're public because they get public money. Now, I just want to ask you something about these charter schools. Can you tell me that, in fact, This is the way of the future, because I will say this, that in 1971, when we were placed under the federal busing mandate, they opened up McGavock Comprehensive High School. It was about 2 years ago that the Board of Education took away comprehensive from the title of all the high schools because we wanted to go back to neighborhood high schools. But these charter schools, I want you to tell me that these are the way of the future, similar to what comprehensive high schools were in the past. I'll ask you that, and I'll just ask that you take in this information that I've given you, and also I'll just turn it over to you.
Councilman Stanley, I guess the thing I'll say to you is that we exist and operate by state law, and the state laws governing charter schools and charter school starts are our reality.
Well, I will just say this, that the state government, they threatened Metro Nashville, the Board of Education specifically, with action, litigation, action to take, to allow this charter school that was voted down by the Board of Education. I am very appreciative of the fact that the Board of Education realized that the processes that this charter school was going to operate on were not following the accepted rules of operation for a public school. I think it's just important to understand that. And I will say this, at Metro Nashville, I've spoken with census officials. They informed me that by the federal census in 2020, we will be the largest city, municipality in the state of Tennessee, and Memphis will be directly behind us. But we'll pass Memphis if we go by the projected growth. And I just think it's important to allow these school systems, especially our school system, the opportunity to operate under their rules, under their guidelines, not allow the state to come in and say, you're going to do this, or you're going to do that. Because I'll tell you this, if something like that happens, I'm not appreciative of that at all. I have a state teaching license. I'm a history teacher. I've been one for over a decade. But there are still some things that I don't appreciate about an overly conservative General Assembly. So with that, I'll just thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Stanley. Has to go down the record for one of the longest questions ever in the world. We have no other council members in queue. Dr. Register and company and school board members, I would like to thank you all for what you do for our students. And this concludes your budget hearing. This concludes our evening. I would like to remind council members we will be back tomorrow for our final budget hearings at 4. Our work session for council members that want to join us for the work session is scheduled to begin at 4:30 on tomorrow evening. And thank you all for indulging us this evening. Have a good night.